She spent 20 years connecting the nation's calls. She was the most essential woman in America. Then the company replaced her with a machine and didn't even warn her it was coming. Take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy drifting off to mildly disturbing, deeply factual history. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's awake while we casually discuss the systematic elimination of an entire profession. Now dim those lights and burrow into your blankets. What did these women actually do all day? How did they learn to connect hundreds of calls without a single mistake? Were they really fired just for wearing wedding rings? What happened when the machines arrived and no one told them? Did anyone fight back, or did they simply disappear? Was it just a technological inevitability, or was there something more calculated behind it? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1923 in a telephone exchange somewhere in Middle America. You're cold, slightly disoriented, and surrounded by the constant murmur of women's voices saying the same phrases over and over. Number please, 1 moment please, I'll connect you now. If you enjoy listening to sleepy stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. The air inside the exchange is thick with a particular kind of tension. Not dramatic, not obvious, just present. Like walking into a room where everyone is holding their breath at the same time. The smell hits you first. Electrical warmth, metal connectors heated by constant use, floor wax applied every morning without fail, and underneath it all, the faint trace of cheap perfume applied before dawn in cold apartments, layered over with the institutional scent of regulation and control. The room hums, not loudly, but persistently. A low mechanical drone from the switchboards lining every wall, punctuated by the soft click of plugs being inserted into jacks, the whisper of cords being pulled taut, the rhythmic tap of women's hands moving across panels with practiced precision. It sounds like a factory, which is exactly what it is, except the product being manufactured is connection itself. One voice to another, one person to another, hundreds of times an hour, thousands of times a day, endlessly, without pause, without error, without acknowledgement. You are standing in the back of a telephone exchange operated by the Bell system, the largest and most powerful communications company in the world. The room is long, narrow, designed with efficiency rather than comfort in mind. Light comes from overhead fixtures, harsh and unforgiving, casting everything in a flat, shadowless brightness that makes it impossible to tell whether it is morning or midnight outside. The windows, if there are any, have been covered or positioned too high to offer distraction. Because distraction in this room is not just discouraged, it is structurally eliminated. The women sit in rows, dozens of them, all dressed identically in dark, modest dresses, hair pulled back, faces tilted toward the boards in front of them, hands moving with mechanical grace. They do not speak to each other. They speak only to the callers, their voices uniform in tone, pitch, and cadence, trained to sound pleasant but never personal, helpful but never familiar. Each woman is assigned a section of the board, a specific range of numbers she is responsible for connecting. She does not leave her position. She does not glance at the woman beside her. She simply works, hour after hour, her body still, her hands in constant motion, her voice repeating the same practiced lines until they stop sounding like language and become pure rhythm. This is what modern efficiency looks like in 1923. Not machines alone, but women trained to behave like machines, performing tasks so repetitive, so precise, that any deviation is immediately visible, immediately correctable, immediately punished. And yet, these women are not unskilled. They are the opposite. They are trained professionals performing one of the most complex, demanding jobs in the American economy. Without them, the telephone system collapses. Without them, business stops. Communication halts. The entire infrastructure of connection depends on their presence, their focus, their willingness to sit in this room and do the same thing over and over without complaint. And they do it beautifully, because they have no other choice. The supervisor walks the floor slowly, her heels making soft, deliberate sounds against the polished wood. She does not look rushed. She does not need to. Her presence alone is enough. The women hear her approach and adjust, imperceptibly, their posture straightening, their hands moving just slightly faster, their voices softening into even greater uniformity. She stops behind one operator, leans in, listens for a moment, then moves on without comment. The operator's shoulders relax, but only slightly, because silence in this room is never quite approval. It is simply the absence of correction. The supervisor's role is not to encourage. It is to observe, to note, to ensure that every operator meets the standard set by the company, a standard that is unwritten, invisible, and yet understood by everyone in the room. Too slow, and you are warned. Too fast, and your accuracy suffers. Too friendly, and you risk encouraging familiarity from callers. Too cold, and complaints are filed. The balance is delicate, exhausting, and maintained entirely by the operators themselves, because the company has made it clear that perfection is expected, deviation is unacceptable, and replacement is always available. Outside this room, the world is changing rapidly. The 1920s are roaring, or so people say. Cities are growing, industries expanding, wealth accumulating in ways that feel both thrilling and unstable. Jazz plays in nightclubs, cars fill the streets, electricity lights homes that were dark just a generation ago. Progress is the word everyone uses, spoken with confidence, with pride, with the unshakable belief that technology will solve problems rather than create them. And at the centre of this progress, quietly holding it together, are the telephone operators. Women who make it possible for a businessman in New York to speak with a partner in Chicago, for a mother in Kansas to hear her daughter's voice in California, for doctors to be reached in emergencies, for lovers to speak across distances, for the entire country to function as a connected whole. They are not celebrated for this work. They are barely acknowledged, but they are essential, and they know it. Or at least they believe they are. Because what they do not know, what no one has told them yet, is that their essentiality has an expiration date. That somewhere in a research facility, engineers are working on a machine that will do their job faster, cheaper, and without complaint. That the same company employing them, the same company benefiting from their labour, is quietly planning to replace them entirely. Not because they have failed, but because they are simply too expensive, too human, too difficult to control in the long term. But that knowledge is still distant, still hidden. For now, the operators sit in their rows, connect their calls, repeat their lines, and believe that as long as they do their jobs perfectly, they are safe. That belief, comforting and fragile, will not last much longer. The shift begins before dawn, which means the operators begin their day in darkness. Alarm clocks ring in small apartments across the city, pulling women from sleep into the cold reality of another identical day. They rise quickly, no time for lingering, no space for slowness. The work starts early, and the company does not tolerate lateness, not once, not ever. Dressing is efficient, mechanical, the same dark dress, pressed and clean, the same low-heeled shoes, practical and silent. Hair pulled back tightly, no loose strands, nothing that could fall forward and obstruct vision or suggest vanity. Makeup, if worn at all, is minimal. A touch of powder perhaps, but nothing bold, nothing noticeable. Because telephone operators are expected to be invisible even when they are seen. Their appearance should suggest competence, modesty, and complete lack of distraction. Anything else risks the wrong kind of attention, the wrong kind of judgment, and in a workplace where women are constantly observed, judgment arrives swiftly and without mercy. They leave their homes while the streets are still quiet, walking alone or in small groups, moving through neighbourhoods that feel suspended between night and day. The air is cold, sharp, carrying the smell of coal smoke and damp pavement. Street lamps flicker, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink as the women pass beneath them. Some carry small lunches wrapped in cloth, food prepared the night before because there will be no time later. Others stop briefly at corner shops, purchasing coffee or rolls, quick sustenance before the long hours ahead. The walk to the exchange is silent for most. Not unfriendly, just tired, conserving energy for the work that will demand everything from them once they arrive. A few exchange greetings, brief and polite. How are you? Fine, thank you. Cold this morning. Yes, very cold. The conversations do not deepen. There is no time, no space, and perhaps no need. These women work together but do not quite work as a unit. Each is responsible only for her own performance, her own section of the board, her own ability to meet the impossible standards set by the company. They arrive at the exchange building as the first hint of light begins to touch the horizon. The building itself is large, imposing, built with the kind of architectural confidence that suggests permanence. Heavy doors, tall windows, stone steps worn smooth by years of use. It feels institutional, which it is. Inside, the air shifts immediately. Warmer, but not comfortably so. The smell of floor wax and electrical heat becomes stronger, more present. The hum of the switchboards can be heard even from the entrance, a constant background noise that never stops, never softens, just continues endlessly like a mechanical heartbeat. The operators enter through a side door, not the main entrance. That is reserved for visitors, for management, for people whose presence in the building is considered notable. The operators use the employee entrance, a narrower hallway that leads directly to the locker room where they remove their coats, hang their belongings, and prepare for the shift. The locker room is small, cramped, lined with metal lockers that clang when opened, each one assigned to a specific operator. There is no decoration, no personal touches allowed, just numbers and locks and the faint smell of perfume layered over years of use. They do not linger here. The clock is always present, always counting, and tardiness is not forgiven. They move quickly, efficiently, checking their appearance one final time in the small mirrors hung unevenly along the wall. Hair still neat, dress still pressed, hands clean, everything in order. Then they proceed to the main floor where the real work begins. The switchboard room feels different once the shift has officially started. The hum grows louder as more operators take their positions, as more calls begin to come through, as the machinery of connection starts to operate at full capacity. Each operator approaches her assigned station, sits in the wooden chair that has moulded itself to countless bodies over the years, and reaches for the headset hanging from the panel above. The headset is heavy, metal and cloth, designed to sit snugly over the ears, leaving the hands free to work. It connects the operator to the caller, to the system, to the endless stream of voices requesting connection, demanding service, expecting perfection. The board itself is a wall of jacks and plugs, rows upon rows of small holes, each one corresponding to a specific telephone line somewhere in the city. When a call comes in, a small light blinks above the corresponding jack. The operator sees it immediately, her eyes trained to catch even the slightest flicker. She reaches for a cord, one of dozens hanging in front of her, and inserts the plug into the jack with a smooth, practiced motion. The connection is made instantly. She speaks. "Number, please." The caller responds, sometimes clearly, sometimes not, sometimes politely, sometimes with impatience or frustration or anger that has nothing to do with the operator, but will be directed at her regardless. She listens, notes the number, calculates the connection required, and reaches for another cord, pulling it across the board to the appropriate outgoing jack. Another smooth insertion, another click. "One moment, please." And the call is connected. The voices on either end can now speak, and the operator moves on to the next blinking light, the next waiting caller, the next repetition of the same process. There is no pause, no break in the rhythm. The lights blink constantly, sometimes one at a time, sometimes 3 or 4 simultaneously. The operator must prioritize, must decide which call is most urgent, which caller has been waiting longest, which connection will take the least time to complete. All of this happens in seconds, without thought, without hesitation, because thinking slows the process, and slowness is unacceptable. The company tracks every call, every delay, every second of idle time. The operators know this. They feel it in the constant presence of supervisors, in the reports filed daily, in the quiet conversations that happen in the supervisor's office, conversations that sometimes result in an operator being called aside, reprimanded, or quietly let go. And so they work without stopping, hands moving, voices repeating, eyes scanning the board for the next light, the next task, the next demand. Their bodies become part of the machinery, their movements as mechanical as the switches they control. They do not fidget, they do not stretch, they do not allow discomfort to show. Because the work demands stillness, focus, absolute attention, and anything less is visible, measurable, and punishable. The hours pass slowly and quickly at the same time, slowly because every minute feels the same, every call blending into the next until time loses meaning, quickly because the shift never feels like it has truly begun, before it is suddenly half over, They're nearly finished, then finally, mercifully, complete. The operators do not glance at the clock. Looking at the clock suggests impatience, suggests distraction, suggests that the work is not enough to hold their attention, and so they simply wait, trusting that the supervisor will announce when the shift has ended, when they are finally permitted to remove the headset, stand, and walk away from the boards that have claimed their entire focus for the past 8 hours. When the announcement finally comes, the operators do not react with celebration or relief. They simply stop, remove the headsets, stand slowly, carefully, their bodies stiff from hours of sitting. They walk to the locker room in the same quiet formation they arrived in, retrieve their coats, and leave the building in silence. Outside, the light has changed. Morning has turned to afternoon, or afternoon to evening, depending on the shift. The world has continued without them, unaware of the hundreds of calls they connected, the thousands of voices they briefly held together before releasing them back into the static. They walk home alone or in small groups, their faces tired but composed. Tomorrow they will do it all again, and the day after that. Because this is the work. This is what modern life requires, and they are the ones who make it possible, even if no one will ever thank them for it. The training to become a telephone operator is not gentle. It is systematic, deliberate, and designed to eliminate anyone who cannot meet the standard before they are ever allowed near an actual switchboard. Because while the work appears simple from the outside, repetitive and mechanical, the company knows better. They know that a single mistake, a single misconnection, can disrupt business, anger customers, and damage the reputation of efficiency they have spent years building. And so they train carefully, ruthlessly, weeding out weakness before it becomes a problem. The process begins with an application, which most women approach with a mixture of hope and caution. Telephone operator positions are desirable in 1923. They pay better than most jobs available to women. They offer steady work, regular hours, and a kind of respectability that factory labour or domestic service cannot provide. To work for the Bell system is to work for the largest, most powerful communications company in the world, and that association carries weight. It suggests reliability, competence, a certain kind of social standing that matters in a world where women's professional options are severely limited. But the application is only the first barrier. The company does not accept everyone. In fact, they reject most. Because the Bell system has very specific ideas about what makes a good operator, and those ideas are not negotiable. Age matters. Women must be young, ideally between 18 and 25. Too young suggests immaturity. Too old suggests inflexibility, an inability to adapt to the demanding pace of the work. Height matters. Women must be able to reach the top rows of the switchboard without strain, but not so tall that they appear imposing or physically dominant. Weight matters. Not officially, of course, but the supervisors conducting interviews notice. Anything that suggests lack of discipline, lack of control is noted and often results in quiet disqualification. Marital status matters more than anything else. Single women are preferred, strongly preferred, because married women the company believes are unreliable. They have other responsibilities, other priorities, husbands who might demand their attention, children who might require care, households that might interfere with their ability to arrive on time and work without distraction. And so, the application asks directly, are you married? Do you plan to marry soon? The answers are recorded, evaluated, and often determine the outcome before the interview even begins. The interview itself is brief, formal, and designed to test composure. The applicant sits across from a supervisor, a woman usually older, experienced, with an expression that reveals nothing. Questions are asked. Why do you want this position? Can you work long hours without complaint? Are you comfortable taking instruction? Can you remain calm under pressure? The applicant answers carefully, aware that tone matters as much as content, that hesitation suggests doubt, that too much confidence suggests arrogance. The balance is delicate, and most women leave the interview with no sense of whether they succeeded or failed. Those who are accepted receive a letter, brief and impersonal, instructing them to report for training on a specific date at a specific time. Lateness will not be tolerated. Failure to appear will result in immediate disqualification. The tone is clear. This is an opportunity, yes, but it is also a test, and the testing has only just begun. Training takes place in a separate room, smaller than the main switchboard floor. lined with practice boards that simulate the real equipment without connecting to actual telephone lines. The trainees, usually 5 or 6 women at a time, are seated in a row and given their first instruction: watch. A senior operator, sometimes the supervisor herself, demonstrates the process: how to answer, how to insert the plug, how to pull the cord without tangling, how to speak clearly, calmly, with exactly the right tone, not too fast, not too slow, not too warm, not too cold. The trainees watch in silence, absorbing every detail, because questions are not encouraged. Repetition is the teaching method. Observation followed by imitation followed by correction. Then they are told to begin. Each trainee puts on a headset, lighter than the real ones but close enough to prepare them. They reach for the practice cords, insert them into the jacks, and speak the required phrases. Number, please. 1 moment, please. I'll connect you now. Their voices sound uncertain at first, tentative, as if they're asking questions rather than making statements. The supervisor listens, walks behind them, stops when something is wrong. Too quiet, too hesitant, too fast. Try again. And they do, repeating the same lines over and over, adjusting their tone, their speed, their inflection, until the supervisor moves on without comment. The training continues for days, sometimes weeks. The practice calls grow more complex. Multiple connections, busy lines, callers who are impatient or unclear, situations designed to create pressure, to test whether the trainee can maintain composure when things do not go smoothly. Because the real work will be filled with complications, callers who speak too quickly, numbers that are unclear, connections that fail for no apparent reason, and the operator must handle all of it without visible frustration, without error, without allowing the stress to show in her voice. Some trainees do not make it through. They are thanked quietly, told that the work is simply not a good fit, and dismissed with no explanation beyond that. Others complete the training but are still not hired, held in reserve, waiting for a position to open, which may or may not happen. And a few, the ones who demonstrate perfect composure, perfect accuracy, perfect obedience, are finally allowed to move to the main floor, where the real work begins, and where the training, they quickly realize, was only a preview of what will be expected from them every single day. The rules governing telephone operators are not written in a single document. There is no handbook given to new hires, no clear list of regulations to study and memorize. Instead, the rules are transmitted through observation, through correction, through the quiet, constant pressure of supervision. They are learned by watching other operators, by noting what draws reprimand and what passes without comment, by absorbing the unspoken expectations that define every aspect of the work. And they are absolute. Deviation is not tolerated. Interpretation is not permitted. The rules exist and the operators follow them, because not following them means losing the job entirely. The first rule, the most fundamental, is speed. Calls must be connected quickly, not rushed, because rush suggests carelessness, but without delay. The company tracks the average time each operator takes to complete a connection. Too slow, and the operator is called into the supervisor's office, reminded that efficiency is essential, warned that continued slowness will not be overlooked. The standard is precise, measurable, and enforced without exception. The second rule is accuracy. A misconnection is a failure, not a mistake, not an accident, a failure. Every misconnected call is noted, recorded, and attached to the operator's file. Too many misconnections result in discipline. Continued misconnections result in termination. The operators know this. They feel it in the weight of every cord they pull, every number they confirm, every connection they make. One wrong jack, one transposed digit, and the consequences follow immediately. The third rule is tone. The voice must be pleasant but not familiar, helpful but not personal, clear but not loud. Operators are trained to speak in a specific cadence, a rhythm that sounds natural but is entirely constructed. Too much warmth, and the caller might mistake professionalism for friendship. Too much coldness, and complaints are filed. The balance is delicate, exhausting to maintain, and constantly monitored. Supervisors listen at random, standing behind operators without warning, noting any deviation, any shift in tone that suggests the operator is not perfectly controlled. The fourth rule is stillness. Operators must remain seated unless given explicit permission to stand. They must not fidget, stretch, or move unnecessarily. Their hands should only touch the cords, the plugs, the switchboard itself. Everything else is distraction. The company believes, or at least claims to believe, that stillness promotes focus, that movement disrupts concentration, that the best operators are the ones who can sit for hours without shifting, without discomfort, without acknowledging the physical strain of remaining motionless. The fifth rule is silence. Operators do not speak to each other. They do not chat during quiet moments. They do not discuss personal matters, share stories, or form friendships that might interfere with the work. The supervisor's presence ensures this. She walks the floor constantly, her footsteps soft but always audible, a reminder that observation is continuous. If two operators are caught speaking, both are reprimanded. If it happens again, the consequences escalate. The message is clear. The only voice that matters is the one speaking to the caller. Everything else is irrelevant. The sixth rule, unspoken but understood, is obedience. Operators do not question instructions. They do not suggest improvements. They do not offer opinions on how the work might be done differently. The system has been designed by engineers, refined by managers, and perfected through years of operation. The operator's role is not to think about the system, but to execute it flawlessly. Any suggestion otherwise is met with suspicion, because independent thinking in this environment is seen as a threat to uniformity. The seventh rule, perhaps the most insidious, is invisibility. Operators are expected to be present but not noticeable, efficient but not memorable, helpful but not acknowledged. They exist to serve the system, and the system rewards those who disappear into it most completely. Recognition is rare. Praise is almost unheard of. The absence of criticism is the highest form of approval, and the operators learn quickly that silence from the supervisor is the closest thing to success they will ever experience. And then there are the personal rules, the ones that extend beyond the switchboard and into the operator's private lives. Appearance is regulated. Hair must be neat. Dresses must be modest. Jewelry is discouraged. Makeup must be subtle. The company does not explicitly police these things, but the supervisors notice, and their notices carry weight. An operator whose appearance draws attention, whether through boldness or dishevelment, is quietly reminded that professionalism extends to every visible aspect of her presentation. Behavior outside the exchange is also scrutinized. Operators are expected to maintain respectability, to avoid situations that might reflect poorly on the company. Going to clubs, drinking publicly, associating with questionable individuals, all of these are noted, sometimes reported, and occasionally result in dismissal. Because the company's reputation depends not just on the work itself, but on the character of the women performing it. And character, in the company's view, must be carefully controlled. The most enforced rule, though rarely stated directly, is the marriage ban. Officially, the Bell system does not forbid married women from working. Unofficially, married women are almost never hired, and those who marry while employed are quietly encouraged to resign. Sometimes the encouragement is gentle. A supervisor mentions that married life and operator work are difficult to balance. Sometimes it is more direct. A married operator finds her hours reduced, her shifts change to less desirable times, her performance suddenly scrutinized more closely than before. The message is unmistakable. Marriage and this job cannot coexist. One must be abandoned. And since the company controls the work, the choice, such as it is, becomes obvious. The operators know all of this. They absorb it, internalize it, and shape their lives around it. Because the alternative is unemployment, loss of income, loss of respectability, and in an economy where women's options are limited, that loss feels impossible to risk, and so they follow the rules, all of them, without complaint, without protest, without questioning whether the rules are fair, necessary, or even reasonable. They simply obey. Because obedience is the only path to survival in a system designed to extract perfect performance while offering nothing in return but the privilege of continuing to work. The marriage ban is never written down, not in contracts, not in training materials, not in any official document that could be examined, questioned, or challenged in a court. And yet every woman who works for the Bell system knows it exists. It is transmitted through whispers, through warnings from older operators, through the quiet disappearances of women who made the mistake of believing the company might allow them to be both married and employed. The ban is not a rule in the legal sense. It is a practice, a tradition, an expectation so deeply embedded in the company's culture that challenging it feels less like questioning a policy and more like questioning reality itself. The reasoning when supervisors bother to offer it is always practical. Married women, they explain, have divided loyalties. They cannot give their full attention to the work when they have husbands at home, households to manage, future children to consider. Their priorities will shift, their reliability will decline. And in a job where absolute focus is required, where even a momentary distraction can result in errors, the company cannot afford the risk. It sounds reasonable when framed this way, almost logical, as if the ban is simply a matter of operational efficiency rather than systematic control. But the operators know better, because they have watched what happens when a woman marries. The announcement is made quietly, privately, a small admission to a supervisor or a trusted co-worker, and almost immediately the atmosphere changes. The newly married operator is no longer treated as permanent. Her training is not extended. Her opportunities for advancement, already limited, vanish entirely. Her shifts become less predictable. Her performance, previously acceptable, is suddenly subject to closer scrutiny. Small mistakes that would have been overlooked are now documented. Minor delays that would have passed without comment are now noted in her file. The pressure increases gradually but unmistakably, a slow tightening that makes it clear her presence is no longer welcome. Sometimes the operator resigns voluntarily. She announces her decision with a calm, practiced explanation. She wants to focus on her home life. She feels the work is no longer a good fit. She has decided to pursue other opportunities. The words are polite, neutral, carefully chosen to avoid suggesting coercion. And the supervisor accepts the resignation graciously, thanking her for her service, wishing her well in her future endeavours. The transition is smooth, professional, and entirely predictable. Other times, the operator resists. She insists that she can manage both marriage and work. She points to her record, her performance, her years of reliable service. She promises that nothing will change, that her commitment remains absolute, that her husband understands and supports her career. And for a brief moment, it seems like the company might relent. The supervisor listens, nods, says nothing definitive. But the pressure does not ease. The scrutiny intensifies. The small annoyances accumulate. Schedule changes that make it impossible to maintain any kind of domestic routine. Assignments to the least desirable shifts. Subtle exclusions from informal networks of communication. And eventually, inevitably, the operator realizes that staying is no longer worth the cost. The cruelty of the ban is not in its enforcement, but in its invisibility. Because there is no formal rule to challenge, no written policy to protest, no clear moment of discrimination to point to and name. The process is gradual, subtle, wrapped in language that sounds reasonable and delivered by supervisors who claim to have the operator's best interests at heart. It is almost impossible to fight. How do you challenge something that does not officially exist? How do you prove discrimination when every action taken against you is framed as a legitimate business decision? How do you resist a system that operates through quiet pressure rather than overt force? And so most operators simply accept it. They understand, often before they are even hired, that this job comes with conditions, that it requires sacrifices, that it's a temporary position, not a career, a way to earn money while they're young and single and unencumbered by family obligations. They know that marriage means resignation, that choosing a husband means giving up financial independence, that the company's vision of a proper operator is fundamentally incompatible with the company's vision of a proper wife. Some try to hide their marriages. They continue wearing their maiden names at work. They remove their wedding rings before entering the building. They avoid mentioning their husbands in conversation. They construct careful lies, elaborate stories designed to maintain the illusion of singleness. And for a while, it works. The supervisor does not ask questions she does not want answered. The other operators do not report what they suspect. The system allows the deception to continue as long as it remains invisible. But eventually something slips. A phone call to the exchange asking for a married name. A chance encounter with a supervisor outside of work. A casual comment that reveals too much. And once the marriage is known, Once the secret is exposed, the consequences follow immediately, not dramatic, not public. Just a quiet conversation in the supervisor's office, a suggestion that perhaps it is time to move on, a reminder that the company has always preferred to employ single women, a warning that continued employment might become increasingly difficult. And the operator leaves. She cleans out her locker. She says goodbye to the women she worked beside but never quite befriended. She walks out of the exchange for the last time. Her career ended not by failure or incompetence, but by the simple act of getting married. And the company replaces her within days, sometimes within hours, because there is always another young single woman waiting for the opportunity to take her place. The machine runs without interruption. The calls continue to connect. The system does not pause to acknowledge what has been lost. This is how the marriage ban operates, not through force, but through inevitability, not through cruelty, but through the quiet, systematic elimination of women who dare to believe they can have both a profession and a personal life. And the most devastating part is that the women themselves often defend it, because they have been told repeatedly that the ban exists for their own good, that married women are happier at home, that domestic life is fulfilling in ways work can never be, that giving up the job is not a loss but a natural progression, a step toward the life they are supposed to want. And maybe some of them do believe it. Maybe some of them walk away genuinely relieved to be free of the constant pressure, the endless repetition, the exhausting performance of perfection. But others leave quietly devastated. They liked the work. They were good at it. They valued the independence, the income, the sense of competence it provided. And they resent deeply and silently that they were forced to choose between a career and a marriage when men are never asked to make the same choice. But resentment in this system has nowhere to go. It cannot be spoken. It cannot be acted upon. It simply accumulates, buried beneath layers of polite resignation, carried silently by women who smile and thank the company for the opportunity, and then go home to mourn the loss of something they were never supposed to want in the first place. The work itself is not particularly complicated. That is what makes it so exhausting. Because complicated work engages the mind, creates variety, offers moments of challenge that break the monotony. But telephone operation is not complicated. It is repetitive. The same motions, the same phrases, the same process executed thousands of times a day until it stops feeling like a task and becomes something closer to reflex. And that repetition, that endless sameness, erodes something in the operators that cannot quite be named. Not their competence, not their focus, something deeper. Something that has to do with the feeling of time passing without progress, of effort expended without growth, of skill perfected in service of a system that does not acknowledge the person performing it. A typical day at the switchboard contains perhaps 4 or 5 distinct actions, repeated in endless variation. The light blinks, the operator inserts the plug, she speaks, the caller responds, she completes the connection, the light goes dark, and then the process begins again. There is no sense of completion, no moment where the work is finished and something has been achieved. The board never clears, the lights never stop blinking, the calls never end. As soon as one connection is made, another is waiting, and another, and another. The work is infinite, and the operator is simply one small component within it, replaceable, forgettable, valuable only insofar as she continues to perform flawlessly. The operators develop strategies to survive the monotony. Some count, not the calls themselves, which would be overwhelming, but smaller milestones. 10 connections before allowing a breath, 20 before shifting weight slightly in the chair, 50 before permitting a brief glance away from the board. These small goals create structure within the shapelessness of the shift, tiny markers of progress in a landscape that otherwise offers none. Others create rhythms. They notice patterns in the way calls arrive, clusters of activity followed by brief lulls. They learn to anticipate busy periods, to prepare mentally for the moments when the board lights up entirely and every ounce of focus is required. They learn too to recognize the quieter moments, the brief pauses when only 1 or 2 lights blink, and in those pauses they allow themselves something close to rest. Not true rest. The headset is still on, the supervisor is still watching, but a softening of attention, a fractional relaxation that makes the next surge of calls slightly more bearable. Some find comfort in the voices, not specific callers, but the variety of human sound passing through the line, accents from different regions, tones that reveal emotion, urgency, joy, frustration. The operators are trained to remain neutral, to offer no reaction beyond professional efficiency, but they still hear everything. The businessman closing a deal, the mother calling to check on a sick child, the lovers speaking in low, careful tones, aware that the operator is listening but pretending she is not. These voices, fleeting and anonymous, become a kind of companionship in a job that offers almost no human connection. But the monotony also creates damage, physical damage first. The operators sit for hours without movement, their bodies locked in the same position, their hands performing the same repetitive motions. Over time, this creates pain, backaches that begin as mild discomfort and progress into something sharp, persistent, impossible to ignore. Neck strain from holding the same posture, chin tilted slightly forward to speak into the headset. Hand cramps from gripping the cords, pulling them taut, inserting plugs hundreds of times an hour. The pain is constant, but complaining is not permitted. The operators learn to carry it silently, to ignore it, to push through it, because acknowledging discomfort suggests weakness, and weakness is not tolerated. The mental damage is harder to measure but no less real. The operators describe it, when they are brave enough to mention it at all, as a kind of fog, a numbness that settles over their thoughts, a difficulty focusing on anything outside the work. They finish their shifts and walk home feeling blank, emptied, as if the hours at the board have drained something essential from them. Conversations with family members feel distant, effortful. Hobbies lose their appeal. Sleep becomes difficult, not because they are not tired, but because their minds continue to repeat the phrases, the motions, the rhythm of the work even when they are no longer physically present. Number, please. 1 moment, please. I'll connect you now. The words loop endlessly, a mental echo that refuses to fade. And there is a psychological toll that runs even deeper. The feeling of being invisible, of performing essential work that no one acknowledges, of knowing that the entire communication infrastructure depends on their labour, while also knowing that they are considered replaceable, expendable, unworthy of respect or recognition. This contradiction, this gap between importance and invisibility, creates a quiet despair that the operators carry without fully understanding it. They are essential and worthless at the same time, necessary and disposable, skilled and unskilled. The system needs them desperately and treats them as if they do not matter. And that disconnect, sustained over months and years, erodes self-worth in ways that are difficult to recover from. Some operators leave because of this, not because they are fired, not because they marry, but because they simply cannot continue. They resign quietly, offering no explanation beyond vague references to personal reasons, and the company lets them go without question, because there are always others waiting, always another young woman eager for the opportunity, unaware of what the work will cost her, what it will take from her that cannot be measured in hours or wages. But most stay. They stay because they need the money, because the alternatives are worse, because they have been trained to endure, to push through discomfort, to prioritize duty over well-being. And so they return to the board day after day, connecting calls, repeating phrases, performing the same mechanical actions until they stop feeling like a person doing a job and start feeling like a component within a machine. And that transformation, from human to mechanism, is exactly what the company wants. Because components do not complain, they do not question, they do not demand recognition, they simply function, efficiently, silently, until they break. The operators rarely speak about what they feel, partly because there is no space for such conversations, and partly because naming the exhaustion, the frustration, the quiet despair would make it too real, too undeniable, and so they carry it silently. They smile when required, they maintain their composure, they follow the rules, and they wait, without quite knowing what they are waiting for something to change. But change, when it comes, will not arrive in the form they expect. The machine that will replace the telephone operators does not announce itself. It does not arrive with drama or ceremony. It appears quietly, incrementally, in research labs and engineering facilities far removed from the exchanges where the operators work. For years it exists only as an idea, a possibility, a theoretical solution to a problem the company has been trying to solve since the telephone system began. The problem is simple. Human operators are expensive. They require wages, training, supervision. They make mistakes. They take breaks. They get sick. They leave to get married. And while they are essential to the system, they are also, from the company's perspective, an inefficiency, a variable that cannot be fully controlled. The automatic telephone exchange, when it's finally perfected, is not a single invention. It is the culmination of decades of incremental improvements, small breakthroughs that slowly, patiently build towards something revolutionary. The early versions are crude, unreliable, prone to failure. But the engineers persist. They refine the mechanics, improve the reliability, reduce the cost. They test the systems in small exchanges, isolated locations where failure will not disrupt major cities, and gradually the machines begin to work, not perfectly, not yet, but well enough to prove that human operators are not in fact irreplaceable. The company watches this progress carefully. They do not make public announcements. They do not inform the operators. They simply observe, calculate, and plan. Because introducing automation too quickly would create panic, resistance, bad publicity. Better to move slowly, to phase in the machines gradually, to allow the transition to feel inevitable rather than abrupt. And so the automatic exchanges begin to appear in small towns first, places where the volume of calls is manageable, where the impact on employment is minimal, where the public is less likely to notice or care. The operators in the major cities hear rumours, stories from colleagues who visited relatives in rural areas and noticed that the telephone service worked differently. No operator answered. No voice said, "Number please." Just a dial tone, a mechanical hum, and the strange, slightly unsettling process of dialing numbers directly, spinning a rotary mechanism that connected the call without human intervention. At first, these stories feel distant, irrelevant. The rural exchanges are small. The call volume is low. Surely, the operators tell themselves, the company will always need human workers in the major cities, where the system is too complex, too unpredictable, too dependent on human judgment to ever be fully automated. But the rumours persist, and slowly, uncomfortably, the operators begin to notice changes in their own exchanges. Small things. Engineers appearing more frequently, observing the boards, taking notes. New equipment being installed in back rooms, equipment that hums and clicks in unfamiliar ways. Managers holding closed-door meetings, speaking in low tones that suggest something significant is being discussed. And then the announcements begin. Not dramatic, not alarming, just brief, neutral statements delivered during shift changes. The company is modernizing. New technology is being tested. Changes are coming, but there is no need for concern. Jobs are secure. The operators are still essential. The operators want to believe this. They need to believe it. Because the alternative, the possibility that they might actually be replaced, is too frightening to fully consider. And so, they accept the reassurances, they continue their work, they tell themselves that the machines are just an experiment, a supplement, a tool that will assist them rather than replace them. And for a while, the company allows them to believe this. Because keeping the operators calm, compliant, and productive is more important than honesty. But the engineers know the truth. The automatic exchanges are not an experiment. They are the future, and that future is arriving faster than anyone outside the company realizes. The dial tone, when it first appears in a major city exchange, is quiet, unobtrusive, almost apologetic. It does not replace the operators immediately. Instead, it coexists with them, a parallel system serving a limited number of lines, handling only the simplest calls. The operators continue their work, unaware that the dial tone is being tested, refined, perfected. They do not see the data being collected, the reports showing that the automatic system is faster, cheaper, and increasingly reliable. They do not know that the company is already planning the next phase, the gradual expansion of the automatic exchanges, the slow, systematic reduction of operator positions. And when the first round of layoffs is announced, it is framed as a routine adjustment. Business needs have changed. Call volume has shifted. Some positions are being eliminated, but this is simply part of normal operations. The operators who are let go are told they were selected based on seniority, performance, or other neutral criteria. They are given 2 weeks' notice, a brief thank you for their service, and no further explanation. They leave quietly, confused and hurt, wondering what they did wrong, unaware that they did nothing wrong at all. They were simply no longer needed. The machine, silent and efficient, had taken their place. The remaining operators watch this happen with growing unease. They ask questions, but the answers are vague, reassuring, designed to prevent panic. The company emphasizes that experienced operators are still essential, that the automatic system cannot handle complex calls, that human judgment will always be necessary, and the operators want to believe this. But they also notice that the number of lights blinking on their boards is decreasing, that the busy periods are becoming shorter, that the calls they are handling are increasingly the difficult ones, the exceptions, the problems the machines cannot yet solve. They are no longer the primary workforce, they are becoming the backup, the safety net, the temporary solution until the machines improve enough to eliminate them entirely. And still, the company does not tell them the truth. Because the truth is uncomfortable. The truth is that the telephone operators, the women who built and sustained the communication infrastructure of America, who connected millions of calls, who made modern business and social life possible, are being systematically erased. Not because they failed, not because they were inadequate, but because they were human. And human labour, in the company's calculation, is simply too expensive, too complicated, too difficult to control. The machines are cheaper. The machines do not get married. The machines do not demand wages or breaks or respect. The machines simply work, endlessly, without complaint, without consciousness, without any understanding of what they have taken from the women they replaced. The operators begin to understand this slowly, painfully, in fragments. A co-worker dismissed without clear reason. Another exchange closing, its staff reassigned or let go entirely. The growing presence of engineers, the increasing automation, the subtle but unmistakable message that their work, once essential, is now becoming optional. And they realize with a kind of quiet horror that they have been betrayed. Not dramatically, not maliciously, just efficiently. The company they served faithfully, the system they upheld perfectly, the work they performed without complaint, has decided they are no longer worth the cost. And there is nothing they can do about it, because the machines are already here, the transition is already underway, and the future, which once seemed to depend on them entirely, has moved on without them. The operator's response to automation is not unified. It cannot be, because each woman experiences the threat differently, processes it according to her own circumstances, her own understanding, her own capacity for resistance or resignation. Some refuse to believe it is happening, clinging to the company's reassurances, insisting that their experience and skill make them irreplaceable. Others accept it immediately, recognizing the futility of fighting a technological shift driven by forces far beyond their control, and a very few, try to resist. The resistance, when it occurs, is quiet, disorganized, and almost entirely ineffective, because the operators have no union, no collective bargaining power, no legal protections against dismissal. They work at will, which means the company can terminate their employment at any time for any reason, without explanation or recourse. And so their resistance takes the form of small, desperate acts that change nothing but offer a momentary sense of agency in a situation where agency has been systematically denied. Some operators slow their work deliberately, not dramatically, just slightly. Enough to create delays, to inconvenience the company, to remind the managers that human workers, unlike machines, can choose to be less efficient. But this strategy fails immediately. The supervisors notice. Performance reviews are conducted, warnings are issued, and the operators who persist are simply fired, replaced within days by women who are grateful for the opportunity and unaware of the automation creeping toward them. Others try to organize. They hold quiet meetings after shifts, gathering in small groups to discuss their situation, to share information, to consider whether collective action might be possible. But these meetings are difficult to sustain. The operators are tired. They live scattered across the city. They have families, responsibilities, limited time and energy, and the fear of being caught, of being labelled a troublemaker, of losing the job before the automation takes it anyway, is overwhelming. Most of these gatherings dissolve after 1 or 2 sessions, the participants drifting back to their individual routines, their brief moment of solidarity fading into resignation. A few operators write letters to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who might care that an entire profession is being eliminated, that thousands of women are losing their livelihoods, that the company is prioritizing profit over people without any consideration for the human cost. But the letters are rarely published. The newspapers are not interested in the complaints of telephone operators. The politicians do not respond. And the public, the thousands of people who rely on the telephone system daily, do not seem to notice or care that the voices connecting their calls are disappearing. Because the transition is smooth, the company has planned it carefully, executed it gradually, ensured that service quality does not decline even as human workers are replaced by machines. Callers do not experience interruptions. They do not hear desperate operators pleading for their jobs. They simply pick up the phone, hear a dial tone instead of a voice, and dial the number themselves. It is faster, more convenient, more modern, and if anyone wonders what happened to the women who used to connect the calls, the thought does not linger long enough to become concern. The operators themselves are offered very little, no retraining programs, no assistance finding new employment, no acknowledgement that the company's decision has upended their lives. Some are given severance pay, a few weeks' wages as a gesture of goodwill. Others are simply let go with no compensation beyond their final paycheck. A few are transferred to other positions within the company, administrative roles or clerical work that pays less and offers no security. But most are simply dismissed, thanked for their service, wished well, and forgotten. The younger operators, the ones who have been working only a few years, find new jobs relatively quickly. They are still young enough, adaptable enough, to start over in retail, in offices, in whatever positions are available to women with limited formal education but strong work ethic. The transition is painful, the wages often lower, but they survive. The older operators, the ones who have devoted decades to the bell system, fare much worse. They are in their 30s, sometimes their 40s, too old in the eyes of most employers to be worth training, too experienced perhaps to be willing to accept entry-level wages. They search for work, apply to dozens of positions, attend interviews where they are politely told that the company has decided to go with someone younger. And eventually, many of them stop searching. They withdraw from the workforce entirely. Their careers ended not by choice but by a technological shift that rendered their expertise obsolete overnight. Some marry quickly, out of necessity rather than desire, because marriage, which once meant losing the job, now becomes the only viable option for financial security. They find husbands, settle into domestic roles, and try not to think too much about the years they spent at the switchboard, the skill they developed, the independence they once had. They tell themselves they are content, that this was always the plan, that leaving the workforce was inevitable, but the bitterness remains, buried beneath layers of forced acceptance. Others fall into poverty. Unable to find work, unable to marry, they struggle to pay rent, buy food, maintain any semblance of stability. They take whatever jobs are available, cleaning houses, washing laundry, work that pays almost nothing and offers no dignity. And they remember, with a sharp, painful clarity, what it felt like to be essential, to be needed, to be part of something larger than themselves. And they wonder, though they rarely speak it aloud, whether anyone cares that they have been discarded. The company, for its part, moves on without hesitation. The automatic exchanges expand rapidly. More operators are dismissed, more machines are installed, and the executives congratulate themselves on a successful modernization, a technological triumph that has reduced costs, increased efficiency, and positioned the Bell system as a leader in innovation. The human cost is not mentioned in their reports. It does not appear in the financial statements. It is simply invisible, like the operators themselves were always meant to be. And so the profession dies, not dramatically, not with protest or ceremony, just quietly, efficiently, systematically. The telephone operators, who connected a nation, who made modern communication possible, who performed essential work with skill and dedication, are erased from the system they helped build, and the machines, indifferent and eternal, take their place. The dial tone hums, the calls connect, and no one says "number please" anymore. The silence that follows the operator's displacement is not empty. It is filled with lessons, most of which will not be learned. Because the story of the telephone operators is not unique, it is a pattern, a blueprint, a demonstration of how an entire profession, particularly one dominated by women, can be eliminated without protest, without protection, without anyone outside the affected group caring enough to intervene. And that pattern will repeat, is repeating, will continue to repeat as long as technology advances faster than empathy, as long as efficiency is valued more than people, as long as the cost of progress is calculated only in profit rather than in human lives disrupted and discarded. The telephone operators were told repeatedly that they were essential, and they were. For a time, they were told their work was valued, and it was, as long as it was profitable. They were told they had security, and they did, until they didn't. The promises were not lies, exactly. They were conditional, contingent, true only as long as circumstances remained unchanged. And when circumstances changed, when technology offered a cheaper alternative, the promises evaporated instantly, replaced by polite apologies and vague assurances that this was simply progress, simply the natural evolution of industry, simply the way things had to be. But the operators knew better, because they had seen how carefully the transition was planned, how gradually the machines were introduced, how little concern was shown for the women being displaced. The company had known for years that automation was coming. They had known that the operators would be replaced, and they had chosen not to warn them, not to prepare them, not to offer any assistance beyond the bare minimum required to avoid bad publicity. Because warning the operators would have complicated the process. It might have sparked resistance, demanded concessions, forced the company to acknowledge that the people they were eliminating were not just workers, but human beings with lives, with families, with futures that were being destroyed. The broader public reaction to the operators' displacement was, predictably, indifferent. A few newspaper articles mentioned the automation. A few opinion pieces noted the loss of jobs. But the tone was generally positive. The automatic telephone system was presented as progress, as modernization, as a technological achievement that made communication faster and more efficient. The fact that this progress came at the cost of thousands of women's livelihoods was mentioned briefly, if at all, and framed as an unfortunate but necessary side effect of innovation. No one suggested that the company had a responsibility to the workers they were displacing. No one questioned whether technological progress should be pursued regardless of its human cost. No one seemed to consider that efficiency and ethics might occasionally be in conflict. And so the operators disappeared from public consciousness as thoroughly as they disappeared from the exchanges. They became a historical footnote, a brief chapter in the story of telecommunications, a cautionary tale that no one bothered to study closely enough to learn from. And the pattern they represented, the systematic elimination of workers by machines, the prioritization of profit over people, the refusal to acknowledge human cost, continued unchallenged, unexamined, accepted as inevitable. What makes the story particularly painful is how predictable it was. The operators were vulnerable from the beginning. They were women in a male-dominated industry. They were non-unionized in an era when unions were the only real protection against exploitation. They were performing work that, while skilled, was also repetitive and mechanical, exactly the kind of work that technology would eventually be able to replicate. And they were employed by a company that had demonstrated repeatedly that it valued efficiency and control above all else. Every factor that made them vulnerable was visible from the start, and yet nothing was done to protect them. No unions were formed, no laws were passed, no safety nets were created. They were simply left exposed, and when the inevitable displacement came, they faced it alone. The operators who remained in the workforce after automation, the ones who found other jobs, carried the experience with them. They learned not to trust promises, not to believe that any job, no matter how essential it seems, is truly secure. Not to invest too much of their identity in their work, because work, they now understood, could be taken away without warning or compensation. And they passed these lessons on, to daughters, to younger women entering the workforce, to anyone who would listen. Work hard, yes, but never forget that the company's loyalty to you is conditional, and when conditions change, you will be the one who suffers the consequences. Some of the operators, decades later, would tell their stories to journalists, to historians, to grandchildren who could barely imagine a world where telephone calls required human operators. And in these tellings, the bitterness was still present. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just there, beneath the surface, a quiet anger at having been used and then discarded, at having given years of their lives to a system that rewarded their service with abandonment. They did not regret the work itself. They had been good at it. They had taken pride in it, but they resented the lie. The suggestion that their loyalty would be rewarded with security, the promise that, if they worked hard enough, followed the rules carefully enough, remained silent and obedient enough, they would be taken care of. Because they had done all of those things, and it had not mattered. The company had replaced them anyway. And the machines, the automatic exchanges that had taken their place, continued to function flawlessly. They did not complain, they did not unionize, they did not get married or pregnant or sick. They simply worked, endlessly, perfectly, without consciousness or conscience. And in that sense, they were the ideal workers, efficient, predictable, disposable without guilt. Everything the company had wanted the human operators to be, but could never quite achieve. The telephone system thrived without them. Calls connected faster. Costs decreased. Profits rose. The technology improved year after year, decade after decade, until the automatic exchanges themselves were replaced by even more advanced systems, digital networks that made the mechanical switches seem as primitive as the operators who had preceded them. And throughout all of this progress, no one paused to ask whether something valuable had been lost, whether the human element, the voice that said "number please," the brief moment of connection between caller and operator, had provided something more than just efficiency. Whether there was a cost to progress that could not be measured in profit margins and productivity statistics. Because there was. The cost was human. It was the women who lost their jobs, their independence, their sense of purpose. It was the families who struggled when the primary income disappeared. It was the generation of women who learned not to trust, not to hope, not to believe that their labour would ever be truly valued. And it was the broader erosion of the idea that workers, particularly women workers, deserved protection, consideration, and dignity in the face of technological change. The telephone operators were not the first to experience this, and they would not be the last. But their story, quiet and forgotten as it is, remains, a reminder that progress is not neutral, that technology does not benefit everyone equally, that the future arrives faster for some than for others, and that the people who bear the cost of innovation are rarely the ones who reap its rewards. The switchboard rooms, once filled with the murmur of women's voices, stand empty now. The chairs remain. The equipment has long since been removed, replaced by machines that require no seating, no rest, no human presence at all. The light that once illuminated rows of operators now shines on nothing but dust and silence. And if you stand in one of these rooms, in the rare exchanges that have been preserved as historical sites, you can almost hear the echoes. "Number, please. 1 moment, please. I'll connect you now." But the echoes are not real. They are memory, imagination. A faint trace of the thousands of women who spent their days in these rooms, connecting calls, following rules, believing they were building something permanent. And perhaps, in a way, they were. Because the telephone system they helped create, the infrastructure of connection they maintained with their labour, still exists. It has evolved beyond recognition. But it is still here. And every time someone makes a call, sends a message, connects with another person across distance, they are using the system that the operators built. They just do not remember the builders. The dial tone hums, constant and impersonal. It has no memory. It does not know that it replaced thousands of women. It does not carry the weight of their displacement. It simply functions, as it was designed to do, efficiently and without conscience. And somewhere, in the scattered remains of archives and personal collections, there are photographs. Rows of women sitting at switchboards, their faces serious, their hands poised over the equipment, their postures perfect. They're young in these photographs, most of them. Serious, professional. And if you look closely, you can see something in their expressions. Not quite hope, not quite resignation, something in between. The face of someone who knows the work is hard but believes it is worth it, who trusts that competence will be rewarded, who has been told and has chosen to believe that this job is secure. And you look at these photographs now, knowing what happened next, knowing that most of these women were displaced within a decade, knowing that their skills were rendered obsolete, their careers ended, their contributions forgotten, and the photographs feel different. They stop being historical documents and become something closer to elegy, evidence of a profession that existed briefly before technology decided it was no longer needed. The telephone operators, the women who connected a nation, the workers who were essential until they weren't, the voices that said "number please" one last time before the dial tone took their place. They are gone now. The machines have won, and the system continues, improved and efficient, carrying no trace of the human cost required to build it. The line goes silent, the connection ends, and no one is left to say thank you for calling. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The dial tone hums in the silence. The operators are gone. The machines have replaced them entirely. The story, it seems, has ended. The women who once connected every call in America have been systematically erased, their profession eliminated by technological progress that moved forward without conscience or pause. The archives hold their photographs. A few elderly women remember, but for the most part they have vanished from history, another forgotten workforce displaced by automation. Except that is not quite where the story ends, because in the 1950s and 60s, something unexpected begins to happen, something that no one at the Bell system anticipated, something that reveals the automation was not quite as complete, not quite as successful, not quite as inevitable as the company had claimed. The machines start failing, not dramatically, not all at once, but persistently, frequently, in ways that become increasingly difficult to ignore. The automatic exchanges, so efficient in theory, prove far more complicated in practice. They malfunction, they misconnect calls, they create crossed lines where strangers suddenly find themselves listening to each other's conversations. They fail during storms, during power surges, during any situation that deviates even slightly from the ideal conditions they were designed for. And when they fail, there is no human operator to step in, to correct the error, to apologize and reconnect the call properly. There is only silence, or worse, the endless mechanical clicking of a system trying and failing to complete a connection. The complaints begin slowly. A few customers notice that calls are taking longer to connect, that wrong numbers happen more frequently, that the quality of service, once impeccable under human operators, has declined noticeably. The company dismisses these complaints initially. Automation is new, there will be adjustments, the technology will improve, but the complaints do not stop, they increase. And gradually, the Bell system is forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The machines, for all their efficiency, cannot handle complexity. They cannot adapt, they cannot problem solve, they can only execute the precise sequence of operations they were designed for. And real telephone service, it turns out, requires far more flexibility than the engineers anticipated. Rural areas suffer the most. In small towns, where the automatic exchanges were installed first as experiments, the service becomes so unreliable that people begin to complain loudly, publicly. Calls that should take seconds to connect instead require multiple attempts. Emergency calls fail to go through, business is disrupted. And the people in these communities, many of whom remember when human operators provided perfect service, begin to demand that the operators be brought back. The company resists at first. Admitting that automation failed would be admitting a massive, expensive mistake. It would mean acknowledging that the thousands of women they displaced were, in fact, not replaceable. That human judgment, human adaptability, human intelligence had value that could not be replicated by mechanical switches. And so the company issues statements. The technology is improving, the problems are temporary, patience is required. But patience, in communities where emergency calls are failing, is in short supply. And then something even more unexpected happens. The operators, the women who were dismissed, who were told they were obsolete, who were forced into marriage or poverty or entirely new careers, start to be called back. Not all of them, not officially. But quietly, gradually, the company begins rehiring former operators for specialized positions. Night shifts, where call volume is low, but complexity is high. Emergency services, where human judgment is essential. Rural exchanges, where the automatic systems never quite worked properly. International calls, which require language skills and cultural understanding that no machine can provide. The rehiring is done quietly, almost secretly, because acknowledging it publicly would mean admitting the automation was incomplete, that the grand modernization campaign was built on flawed assumptions, that the women who were dismissed as unnecessary were actually essential all along. And so the operators returned to work under different titles. Not operators anymore, supervisors, coordinators, specialists. The language changes to obscure the reality, but the work is the same, connecting calls, solving problems, providing the human element that the machines cannot replicate. The women who return are not the same ones who left. They are older now, more cautious, more aware of their value and their vulnerability. They have spent years outside the workforce, or in other jobs, or struggling to survive after losing their primary income, and they return with a kind of quiet bitterness, a knowledge that the company will use them as long as it is convenient and discard them again the moment it becomes profitable. But they return anyway, because they need the money, because they are good at the work, because despite everything, there is a satisfaction in doing something you are skilled at, something that genuinely helps people. And the work is different now. The operators who return are no longer nameless, faceless components of a machine. They are problem solvers, specialists, the people you call when the automatic system fails, when the situation is complicated, when human judgment is required. And ironically, this makes them more valuable than they ever were before automation. Because now they are not just connecting calls. They are fixing the failures of the machines that were supposed to replace them. The company does not advertise this. The public is largely unaware that human operators still exist, still work behind the scenes, still hold the telephone system together when the automation breaks down. But the operators know, and they carry that knowledge with a kind of grim satisfaction. The machines, for all their efficiency, were not enough. The company's grand plan to eliminate human workers entirely has failed. Not completely, not dramatically, but enough that the operators, dismissed and forgotten, have become essential again. And this creates a strange dynamic, because the company still wants to automate completely, still invests in better technology, more sophisticated switches, more reliable systems, still treats the human operators as temporary, as a stopgap measure until the machines can finally do everything. But decades pass, and the machines never quite reach that point. There is always some task they cannot perform, some situation they cannot handle, some problem that requires a human being to step in and solve it. The operators who work in this new era are a different generation. Many never experienced the original displacement. They were hired after automation, brought in specifically to handle the tasks the machines cannot manage, and they learn quickly that their position is precarious, that the company views them as temporary, that every advancement in technology is presented as a step toward their eventual elimination. They live in a constant state of uncertainty, knowing they are essential but never quite secure. Some of these new operators try to organize. Unlike the women of the 1920s, they have seen what automation can do. They understand that individual workers have no protection against technological displacement, and so they attempt to form unions, to create collective bargaining power, to demand guarantees that they will not be discarded the moment a better machine is developed. But the company resists fiercely. Unions, in their view, threaten efficiency. They create obligations, demands, expectations that interfere with management's ability to make decisions based purely on profit. And so the company fights unionization efforts with the same systematic determination they once applied to eliminating the operators entirely. Most of these organizing efforts fail, but a few succeed. In certain cities, certain exchanges, the operators manage to form small unions, fragile and limited but real. And these unions negotiate contracts, not generous contracts, not transformative ones, but agreements that offer some protection, some notice before termination, some acknowledgement that the workers have value beyond their immediate utility. It is not much, but it is more than the original operators ever had. And then, in the 1970s and 80s, something even stranger happens. The telephone system begins to change again, not through automation this time, but through deregulation. The Bell system, the massive monopoly that employed the original operators and then replaced them with machines, is broken apart by the government, split into smaller companies, forced to compete. And in this new competitive environment, something unexpected occurs. Human customer service becomes a selling point. Because customers, it turns out, do not love automation. They tolerate it. They use it because they have no choice. But when given the option, many prefer to speak with a human being, especially when the call is complicated, when something has gone wrong, when they need help rather than just a simple connection. And so the telephone companies, now competing for customers rather than operating as a protected monopoly, begin to emphasize human service. They advertise it. They train operators specifically to be helpful, friendly, personal. They transform the cold, mechanical efficiency of automation into something that feels, at least superficially, more human. The operators hired in this era are called customer service representatives. Their work is similar to the original operators but expanded. They do not just connect calls. They solve problems, answer questions, handle complaints, manage complex situations that require judgment and empathy. And they are, once again, mostly women. Because the skills required, patience, communication, emotional labor, are still associated with femininity, still undervalued, still paid less than equivalent work performed by men. But something has changed. The new operators are more aware of their history. They know what happened to the original telephone operators. They know that technology can eliminate entire professions overnight. They know that companies view workers as expendable. And so they negotiate differently. They demand more. They refuse to accept the same passive acceptance that characterized the original operators. They are not always successful, but they are louder, more organized, more willing to fight for protections that their predecessors never had the opportunity to demand. And the original operators, the few who are still alive, watch this transformation with complicated feelings. Pride, perhaps, that the work they once did is finally being valued, at least partially. Bitterness that this recognition came too late to help them. Relief that younger women will not face the same complete abandonment they experienced. And a lingering sadness that the lessons were learned at their expense, that their displacement had to happen before anyone cared enough to question whether progress should come at such a human cost. By the 1990s, telephone operation has transformed again. Now it is call centers, massive facilities employing thousands of workers, many of them in different countries, connected by digital networks that would seem like magic to the original operators. The work is still repetitive, still demanding, still undervalued, but it is also more visible. Call center workers appear in news stories, in labor disputes, in public consciousness, in ways the original operators never did. And when call centers are automated, when voice recognition software begins to replace human workers, the resistance is immediate, organized, and public. Because this time, people have learned. Workers understand that automation is not inevitable, that it is a choice made by companies prioritizing profit over people. Customers understand that human service has value beyond efficiency, that there are costs to automation that go beyond mere economics, and governments, at least some of them, begin to implement protections, regulations that require notice before mass layoffs, assistance for displaced workers, acknowledgement that technological change creates obligations to the people it harms. It is not enough. It never quite is. Workers are still displaced, jobs are still eliminated, technology still advances faster than empathy. But the conversation has changed. The original telephone operators, dismissed without warning or compensation, forced into poverty or unwanted marriages, forgotten by the system they helped build, did not disappear without leaving a mark. Their story, once it was finally told, became a warning, a reminder, a piece of evidence in the ongoing argument about what we owe to workers when progress makes them obsolete. And in a strange, indirect way, the operators won. Not the victory they wanted, not justice or compensation or recognition during their lifetimes, but a slower, more complicated victory. The victory of making their story impossible to ignore, of forcing future generations to ask questions the original operators were never given the chance to ask. Questions like, does efficiency justify any human cost? Should workers be protected from technological displacement? What do we lose when we replace human labor with machines? And who benefits from progress and who pays the price? These questions do not have easy answers. They are still being debated. still being negotiated in boardrooms and legislatures and union halls and courts. But they are being asked, and that asking, that refusal to accept automation as purely beneficial and inevitable, is the legacy of the telephone operators. The women who connected a nation and were then systematically erased created, through their erasure, a story that could not be erased. A warning that future generations would study, learn from, and use to demand better treatment than the operators themselves ever received. The dial tone still hums, the machines still function. But now, when someone picks up the phone and speaks to a customer service representative, there is a faint awareness, even if unconscious, that the person on the other end is not just performing a service. They are continuing a tradition. They are part of a lineage that stretches back to the original operators, the women who sat at switchboards in the 1920s and said "number please," who were told they were obsolete and then quietly proved essential anyway. And somewhere, in the complicated intersection of technology and humanity, progress and justice, efficiency and ethics, the story of the telephone operators remains, not finished, not resolved, but persistent, waiting, ready to be told again whenever someone needs a reminder that the cost of progress cannot be measured only in profit, that the people who build systems deserve more than abandonment when those systems change, and that the voices saying "number please," even when replaced by dial tones and automated systems and artificial intelligence, were never truly replaceable at all. They were human, they were skilled, they were essential, and they were discarded. But their story survived, and that survival, imperfect and incomplete as it is, might be the closest thing to justice they ever received. The unexpected twist, then, is this. The operators did not disappear. They adapted, they returned, they evolved, and their descendants, the customer service representatives and call center workers and human voices still present in a largely automated world, carry forward the work with a knowledge their predecessors lacked. The knowledge that no job is truly secure, that companies will always choose profit over people if allowed, that technology is not neutral, not inevitable, not beyond question. And that awareness, painful as it is, offers something the original operators never had: the ability to resist, to organize, to demand better, to refuse the lie that displacement is simply progress, and that workers exist only to serve systems rather than the other way around. The machines have not won, not entirely, not yet. And as long as human voices remain, connecting calls, solving problems, providing the flexibility and judgment and empathy that no algorithm can replicate, the story of the telephone operators will continue, changed, transformed, but unfinished. Because the real story was never just about technology. It was about power, about who gets to decide when workers are no longer needed, about what we owe to the people whose labour builds the systems we all depend on, about whether progress should be pursued regardless of its human cost, or whether humanity itself should be the measure by which progress is judged. The telephone operators, dismissed and forgotten, returned and transformed, adapted and persisted, offer no simple answers to these questions, but they offer something more valuable: evidence, proof that the conversation matters, that resistance, even when it fails, changes the terms of future struggles, that workers who are told they are obsolete can, through their very persistence, make obsolescence itself obsolete. The line is still open, the connection remains, and the voices, human and essential and refusing to be silenced, continue to say, "Number please. One moment. I'll connect you now." Not because the machines cannot do it, but because some connections, some moments, some acts of service and care and human recognition should never be fully automated, should never be reduced to pure efficiency, should never forget that on both ends of every call, every connection, every moment of contact there are people who deserve to be heard, people who deserve to matter, people who built the systems that now threaten to erase them. And as long as anyone remembers that, as long as anyone tells the story, as long as anyone asks whether the cost of progress is worth paying, the telephone operators will not have been forgotten. Their displacement will not have been meaningless, and their quiet, persistent refusal to disappear completely will stand as evidence that efficiency is not the only value that matters, that technology serves humanity rather than replacing it, and that the voices saying "number please," even when replaced by machines, were saying something more important than anyone realized at the time. They were saying, "We are here, We matter. We are more than our function, and you cannot erase us without losing something essential, something human, something that no machine, no matter how advanced, can ever truly replicate. The dial tone hums, but listen carefully. Beneath it, if you know how to hear it, there is another sound. The echo of voices, the memory of connection, the ghost of a profession that refused to die completely. And that sound, faint and persistent and impossible to silence entirely, is the real legacy of the telephone operators, not their erasure, but their refusal to be erased, not their obsolescence, but their insistence that some things should never become obsolete. And that insistence carried forward by every worker who refuses to accept displacement without resistance, who organises, who demands protection, who asks what we owe to the people whose labour makes progress possible, is the unexpected twist in a story that seemed to end with machines replacing humans entirely. Because the story did not end, it changed, it evolved, it continues, and as long as human voices remain in the system, connecting calls that machines cannot handle, solving problems that algorithms cannot address, providing care and judgment and empathy that no technology can replicate, the telephone operators will not have been replaced. They will have been transformed, but not erased, never completely erased, and that persistence, against all odds, against the weight of technological progress and corporate indifference and systematic devaluation of women's labour, is the real story. Not the story of obsolescence, but the story of adaptation, of survival, of quiet, persistent refusal to accept the lie that human beings can ever truly be made obsolete, that some workers matter more than others, that progress justifies any cost. The operators knew better, and through their displacement, through their suffering, through their eventual partial return, they taught a lesson that future generations would need, the lesson that efficiency without humanity is not progress, that technology without ethics is not innovation, that systems built by people have obligations to those people that do not end the moment a better machine is invented. The dial tone hums, the machines function, but the operators in one form or another remain, changed, diminished, but persistent, and that persistence, however incomplete, however imperfect, is the closest thing to victory they ever achieved. Not the victory they deserved, but the victory they earned, the victory of making their story impossible to forget. And in a world that moves too fast, that forgets too easily, that erases too completely, that might be the most important victory of all. The line stays open, the connection continues, and somewhere, in the complicated machinery of modern communication, in the digital networks that span the globe, in the automated systems that handle billions of calls every day, there is still space for a human voice, still a need for human judgment, still a moment when someone picks up the phone and hears, not a machine, but a person. And in that moment, however brief, however rare, however diminished from what it once was, the telephone operators are still there, still connecting, still serving, still proving, one call at a time, that some things should never be fully automated. Number, please. One moment. I'll connect you now. The words are simple, but they carry weight, history, meaning. The memory of women who spoke them thousands of times a day, who believed they were essential, who were told they were obsolete, and who refused in the end to accept that assessment entirely. The machines have not won, not completely, and as long as that remains true, as long as human voices persist in systems designed to eliminate them, the story of the telephone operators will continue, unfinished, unresolved, but alive. And that perhaps is the most unexpected twist of all. Not that the operators were replaced, but that they were never fully replaceable, that the system designed to eliminate them could not quite function without them, that progress, for all its power, could not completely erase the human element it was designed to replace. The dial tone hums, but beneath it, if you listen, there is still a voice, faint, persistent, refusing to disappear, saying across decades, across technological revolutions, across systematic attempts at erasure, we are still here, we still matter, and you cannot build a system without us no matter how hard you try. And that voice, quiet and stubborn and impossible to silence completely, is the legacy of the telephone operators, not their displacement, but their persistence, not their obsolescence, but their essentiality, not their erasure, but their refusal to be erased. The line remains open, the story continues, and the operators, in one form or another, are still connecting calls, still solving problems, still providing the human element that no machine can fully replicate. Number please, one moment, I'll connect you now. The words echo through history, and the connection, imperfect and incomplete and constantly threatened, remains. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us keep making more content. See you in the next one.